50 years after Elvis Presley's death, his tomb has been opened. But what they found inside shocked everyone. Subscribe to the channel and write in the comments what you think about this discovery and where you watch this video. For 50 years, Elvis Presley's grave had remained undisturbed, a solemn place of pilgrimage for millions of fans from around the world. His final resting place at Graceland was more than a burial site. It was a monument to a man who had defined an era, shaped music history, and left behind an enduring legacy. Year after year, fans gathered on the anniversary of his death, holding candlelight vigils, singing his songs, and leaving flowers, letters, and personal tributes on the grave. But now, for the first time since 1977, that grave was about to be opened. The decision had not come lightly. The official reasoning given to the public was a routine conservation effort. The Presley estate, in cooperation with local authorities and preservation experts, had determined that the structural integrity of the burial site required evaluation. Over time, weathering, moisture, and the natural settling of the ground could cause damage, and it was deemed necessary to ensure the grave remained properly preserved for future generations. Yet, beneath the surface of this explanation, there were murmurs of something more. For decades, rumors had surrounded Elvis's death. Conspiracies flourished. Stories of faked deaths, secret escapes, and a man too famous to continue living in the spotlight. People claimed to have seen him alive in various places over the years, fueling speculation that he had staged his death to retreat from a life that had become too much to bear. Many dismissed these as the fantasies of obsessive fans unwilling to accept that their idol was truly gone. But even among experts, questions remained. The inconsistencies in official reports, the strange circumstances of his final days, and now the growing concerns about anomalies at his grave all contributed to the unease that surrounded the decision to finally open the tomb. The Presley family had been hesitant. Lisa Marie Presley, the sole heir to her father's estate before her passing, had been particularly protective of his resting place. For years, she had resisted any attempts to disturb it, believing that whatever had happened in the past should stay in the past. However, with Graceland now under the care of her son, and the preservation team insisting on the necessity of an inspection, the final approval had been given. There were strict conditions, full privacy, limited access, and a controlled environment with only authorized personnel present. The public was to remain unaware until the process was complete. Despite these measures, word had begun to spread. Speculation ran wild, fueled by leaked documents and whispers among insiders. Social media erupted with theories ranging from the plausible to the outlandish. Some believed that this was simply an effort to ensure the long-term preservation of a historical landmark, while others were convinced that something had been discovered, something that would challenge everything people thought they knew about Elvis Presley's death. The preparation for the exhumation was meticulous. The area around the grave was secured, and a team of forensic experts, historians, and preservationists was assembled. Ground-penetrating radar was used to assess the condition of the burial chamber before any physical work began. Sensors monitored environmental factors such as temperature and humidity, ensuring that the integrity of the site would not be compromised. Every precaution was taken to avoid unnecessary disturbance while gathering the necessary data. Security was also a top priority. Graceland, usually open to visitors year-round, temporarily restricted access to the area surrounding the grave. A controlled perimeter was established to prevent leaks to the press, and all personnel involved were required to sign strict non-disclosure agreements. The involvement of legal experts ensured that every step followed the appropriate regulations, as the family had insisted that this would not become a spectacle. The night before the procedure was scheduled to begin, an eerie stillness settled over Graceland. The usual quiet of the estate seemed heavier, more charged with the weight of what was about to happen. Those who had worked at Graceland for years, who had walked its halls and tended its grounds, spoke in hushed voices about the unsettling feeling in the air. Whether it was the power of legend, the weight of history, or something more, there was no denying that this was a moment unlike any other in the estate's long and storied past. As dawn broke, the team gathered at the site. The Presley family, though absent in person, had sent representatives to oversee the process. Cameras were set up to document every step, not for public viewing, but to ensure transparency and accuracy in the records. A final review of the procedures was conducted, and then, with a collective deep breath, the first steps toward opening the tomb began. The process started with the careful removal of the outermost layers of the burial site. Over the years, the grave had been reinforced to withstand environmental conditions and potential threats of vandalism. Every movement was slow and deliberate, with experts meticulously recording the condition of each layer as they progressed. The goal was not to rush, but to preserve and document every detail as they made their way toward the casket itself. As they worked, there was an undeniable tension among the team members. They were not merely uncovering a piece of history, they were touching something sacred, something that had remained undisturbed for half a century. And deep down, each of them knew that there was a possibility, however small, that they might find something no one had anticipated. The final protective barrier was reached. Beneath it lay the sealed casket of Elvis Presley, just as it had been placed in 1977. For a moment, everything was still. The team exchanged glances, acknowledging the gravity of what they were about to do. The lead preservationist gave a silent nod, and with steady hands they began the process of opening the casket. What they found inside would change everything. The morning air was thick with humidity, and a low, gray sky cast a muted light over Graceland as the preservation team gathered around the grave. Every step taken from this moment forward was to be conducted with precision, with every movement recorded, every detail documented. The sealed casket of Elvis Presley had remained undisturbed for 50 years, a symbol of finality and legend. And yet, as the first instruments were placed against the outer casing, there was an unspoken awareness among those present that they were about to step into unknown territory. The initial phase of the procedure involved the removal of the protective exterior structure. The Presley family had spared no expense in ensuring that the king's final resting place remained secure. The burial site was encased within a reinforced vault, designed not only to withstand natural decay, but also to deter any attempts at unauthorized tampering. It had been an effective safeguard against time, leaving the outer surface remarkably well preserved despite the decades that had passed. The outer layers were carefully lifted away, revealing the original metallic sarcophagus beneath, its polished surface dulled only slightly by the passing years. As the team worked in methodical silence, a peculiar sense of anticipation filled the space. The forensic experts present knew what to expect from an exhumation, and yet this was different. There was something about this particular grave, perhaps the weight of history, or perhaps the countless theories surrounding Elvis's death that made even the most experienced among them proceed with heightened caution. They had prepared for all possible scenarios, but nothing could have prepared them for what they were about to find. The sarcophagus itself showed no immediate signs of tampering. Its seals remained intact, the thick metal edges still tightly secured as they had been on the day of his burial. For a moment, there was hesitation. Though this was, in essence, a preservation procedure, the act of opening the tomb felt like trespassing upon something sacred. A final approval was given, and with slow, deliberate precision, the team began the process of unsealing the lid. A faint metallic creak echoed through the space as the seal was broken for the first time in 50 years. A rush of still air escaped, carrying with it the unmistakable scent of aged fabric and preservation materials. The atmosphere shifted, a collective inhale from those standing around as the casket lid was lifted inch by inch. The inner lining, made of quilted silk, appeared remarkably untouched by time, its pale color still largely intact. At first glance, everything appeared as expected. Elvis Presley lay beneath the carefully draped funeral garments, his body resting just as it had been placed half a century ago. The preservation techniques used at the time had been effective in maintaining structural integrity, though natural degradation had, as was to be expected, begun to take its course. The team prepared to conduct their documentation when something caught their attention, something that immediately set them on edge. Resting beside the folded hands of the king was an object that should not have been there. A pair of sunglasses, perfectly positioned as though placed there with care. The problem was that they were pristine, not merely well preserved, but unnaturally so. The lenses were immaculate, free of dust or wear, and upon closer inspection they appeared to be of a more modern design than those manufactured in the 1970s. A closer analysis would be needed, but the initial assessment suggested an unsettling possibility. These glasses could not have been in the casket since the time of burial. As the team exchanged wary glances, another anomaly was noticed. Beneath the delicate fabric that covered his body, there was something concealed, a rectangular object pressed against the lower portion of the silk lining. Carefully lifting the cloth, the lead preservationist reached inside and retrieved what appeared to be a small leather-bound book. The moment it was removed, there was a sharp intake of breath among those watching. The book was a journal, its pages slightly yellowed with age, but still perfectly intact. A glance at the first page confirmed the unthinkable. This was Elvis Presley's personal diary, one that no records indicated had ever existed. The significance of the discovery was immediate. If this diary had been placed here upon his burial, it meant that the world was about to see the final, unfiltered thoughts of Elvis Presley before his death. If it had been added later, after he had already been laid to rest, then it meant something far stranger had taken place. The team was given a moment to steady themselves before proceeding with the next stage of the inspection. As the documentation continued, an additional discovery deepened the mystery. Beneath the velvet lining, carefully hidden in the internal cavity of the casket, was a small package wrapped in plastic. When opened, it revealed something unexpected: an old-fashioned audio cassette, its label handwritten in ink that had faded slightly but remained legible. The words, written in neat cursive, sent a chill through the air. EP Final Session. The room fell silent. An audio recording labeled as a final session, hidden away in the very place meant to mark his death. It was impossible to ignore the implications. Why had this tape been buried with him? Was it a personal message, a recording of a song no one had ever heard? And most importantly, if this cassette had been placed in his casket at the time of burial, why had it remained a secret all these years? The final discovery sent a wave of unease through the team. Tucked inside the journal was a folded envelope, sealed with a deep red wax stamp. The seal bore a symbol. Two intertwined letters, almost indistinguishable, forming a monogram that none of the team immediately recognized. The weight of the moment settled over everyone present. This letter had been left here intentionally, carefully placed as though meant to be found only when the time was right. A sense of urgency filled the room. What had begun as a preservation effort had turned into something far greater. The contents of the journal, the cassette, the letter, each item suggested that there was more to Elvis Presley's story than the world had ever been told. Yet there were no immediate answers, only more questions. The sarcophagus had been opened, and with it, the past had begun to unravel. The truth, whatever it was, had waited half a century to be revealed. Now it was time to decipher the message that had been hidden away for so long. The air inside the preservation room at Graceland felt heavier than before. Every item retrieved from the sarcophagus had been carefully placed on a long, sterile table beneath bright forensic lighting. The journal, the sunglasses, the cassette, and the sealed letter, all laid out as if waiting for their secrets to be unraveled. The team of preservationists, forensic analysts, and Presley estate representatives stood around the table in tense silence, aware that what they were about to uncover could alter the understanding of Elvis Presley's final days. The first item examined was the sunglasses. A detailed forensic scan confirmed what many had already suspected. They were not manufactured in the 1970s. The lens material and frame design indicated a production period of at least 2 decades later. The realization was unsettling. If these glasses had not been in the casket when Elvis was originally buried, then how had they appeared there? And when? The casket had remained sealed under heavy security, supposedly undisturbed for 50 years. If someone had tampered with the grave, why was there no sign of forced entry? Every possibility seemed equally impossible. The journal was next. The leather cover was aged, the edges worn, but the pages inside had survived the years remarkably well. The handwriting was undoubtedly Elvis's, as confirmed by an expert in historical document authentication. The entries spanned the final months of his life, revealing thoughts far more introspective than anything previously documented about the man. He wrote about exhaustion, the weight of fame pressing down on him like an unbearable burden. He described feeling like a prisoner in his own life, unable to move freely, watched constantly by those who depended on him. He wrote of trust and betrayal, of how the people closest to him seemed more interested in controlling him than in helping him. One of the later entries, written just days before his death, carried a haunting sense of finality. It read, "I've been thinking a lot about what it means to disappear. Maybe you don't have to die to do it. Maybe you just have to let go of the version of yourself they all want you to be. I wonder if they'd let me rest if I did that. I wonder if I could finally breathe." There was no direct statement of intent, no confession of a plan, yet the implications were impossible to ignore. Elvis Presley had been considering an escape, perhaps not in the literal sense of faking his death, but at least in a way that suggested he wanted to step away from everything. The question was whether he had acted on it. The cassette was treated with the utmost care. The plastic casing had protected it from any environmental damage, making it fully playable. An old reel-to-reel system was set up to ensure that the playback would be as clean as possible. As the tape rolled, the room fell into complete silence. Then his voice filled the air. It was unmistakably Elvis. But this was no concert recording, no studio session for an album. This was something different. The song was raw, unpolished, seemingly recorded in solitude. The lyrics spoke of isolation, of breaking free, of vanishing without regret. His voice carried a weight that no one had ever heard in his music before. He was singing not for an audience, but for himself. If I leave tonight, would they ever know? If I slip away, would they let me go? I'm just a shadow, a face they own, a voice they claim, but never know. The room remained silent even after the tape stopped playing. It was unlike anything he had ever recorded. No one had ever mentioned this song before, and there was no official record of it in any known session logs. If this had been his final recording, why had it been hidden in his casket? Had he meant for someone to find it? Or had someone else placed it there? The last item was the letter, still sealed in red wax. There was hesitation before it was finally opened, as if breaking the seal would somehow alter history itself. The paper inside was crisp, the ink dark and clear. It was a single page written in Elvis's hand, addressed to no one in particular. If you are reading this, then the time has come. Some things are too big to explain. Some choices are not made lightly. I was given a path, but it was never mine. What I left behind was never real. What I became was never free. I hope you understand. The truth is never in the spotlight. It's in the silence and the spaces between the notes. If you listen closely, you'll hear it. But you have to listen. There was no signature, no date, just those words, deliberately placed, deliberately left behind. The implications were staggering. Was this a cryptic farewell, a final statement before death? Or was it something else entirely, a hidden message for the future, for those who might one day uncover what had truly happened? The team gathered around the findings, struggling to piece together a narrative that made sense. If Elvis had planned to disappear, had he succeeded? Was his death a carefully orchestrated event? Or had someone else, perhaps someone who knew the truth, planted these artifacts in his grave long after his burial? The Presley estate representatives refused to speculate. Officially, nothing had changed. Elvis Presley had died on August 16, 1977, and was buried at Graceland. Yet, the items recovered from his tomb told a different story, one that was far from resolved. Outside the room, the world remained unaware of what had just been discovered. But soon, it would not be possible to keep it a secret. The findings were too significant, the implications too enormous. The moment the news was released, everything about Elvis Presley's legacy would shift. The question was no longer about how he had lived, but whether he had ever truly died at all. The revelations from the tomb sent ripples through the small, secured circle of experts and Presley estate representatives who had witnessed them. The silence in the room felt thick, suffocating. No one knew what to say first. The diary, the letter, the cassette. Each piece of evidence pointed to something that had seemed impossible just hours ago. There was no logical explanation for how those sunglasses, manufactured years after Elvis's death, had ended up inside his sarcophagus. The diary's entries suggested a man deeply conflicted, a man who felt trapped in his own legend. And then there was the cassette. The song had been haunting, a final cry from a man who had always lived in the spotlight but had never truly felt seen. For the first few hours, the group operated in controlled efficiency. Everything was documented, photographed, recorded, and sealed in protective cases. There was no discussion of what the findings meant, only the logistics of preserving them. But the truth could not be ignored for long. At some point, someone asked the question that had been hanging in the air. What do we do now? The Presley estate representatives hesitated. The discovery had the potential to reshape the entire narrative surrounding Elvis's death. If it became public knowledge, it could ignite an unprecedented media frenzy, drawing in historians, conspiracy theorists, and an overwhelming tide of speculation. The world had spent decades debating whether Elvis had truly died in 1977. This discovery wouldn't provide closure. It would only feed the fire. Legal advisors were brought in within hours. Their immediate concern was not the implications of what had been found, but the legal ownership of the artifacts. The diary, the cassette, and the letter belonged to the Presley estate. That meant they had control over whether the findings would ever be released to the public. The representatives from Graceland Enterprises had already begun to weigh the financial and reputational consequences. Was it better to reveal the truth or to keep it locked away? The forensic experts continued their work, trying to answer the most baffling question. Had the casket ever been disturbed? If someone had placed these items inside after the burial, there should have been evidence. Yet, every preliminary scan and inspection suggested that the sarcophagus had remained sealed since 1977. No tampering, no breaches. But that was impossible. A team of specialists re-examined the security records, the chain of custody for Graceland's maintenance over the decades, and any documented disturbances around the burial site. There was nothing. The grave had been untouched. No reports of forced entry, no unexplained maintenance, nothing to suggest that anyone had ever had the opportunity to place modern artifacts inside a sealed casket. And yet, they were there. The existence of the cassette was a problem that no one could ignore. If Elvis had recorded that song before his death, why had no one ever known about it? His recording sessions had been meticulously documented, his every movement tracked by those who managed his career. No known session contained any reference to this song. There was no studio record, no producer's notes, nothing. Had he recorded it alone? And if so, why had it been buried with him instead of being left for the world to hear? The letter was even more troubling. It didn't read like a farewell message written by a man preparing to die. It sounded like someone speaking to a future audience, someone who knew that, one day, the truth might be uncovered. The phrase, "the truth is never in the spotlight," it's in the silence, in the spaces between the notes. Felt particularly chilling. Was it a metaphor, or was it something more literal? The Presley estate had to make a decision. Keeping the discovery secret was risky. Too many people were now aware of it, and in the digital age, secrets had a way of escaping. If someone leaked the information, they would lose control of the narrative entirely. But making it public was equally dangerous. If they announced what had been found, the speculation would never stop. Some would claim it was a hoax. Others would demand further investigation. The Presley family, already protective of Elvis's legacy, would be placed under a microscope in a way they had never experienced before. Despite the estate's attempts to contain the situation, word began to spread. It started as a whisper, small online forums where dedicated Elvis researchers exchanged theories. A single anonymous post appeared on a conspiracy website, claiming that a restricted project had taken place at Graceland and that something had been found inside the tomb. Then came the leaks. Someone within the preservation team had spoken, or perhaps a document had been accessed by an unauthorized party. The details were vague, distorted by speculation, but the core truth was there. Something had been found inside Elvis Presley's grave that was not supposed to be there. Major media outlets caught wind of the rumors. At first, they dismissed it as another Elvis hoax, just another story in the long history of urban legends surrounding his death. But the weight of the rumors kept growing. Graceland Enterprises refused to comment, which only fueled suspicion. The Presley estate released a carefully worded statement acknowledging that routine preservation efforts had taken place, but denying any claims of unusual discoveries. The public was not convinced. Demands for transparency flooded social media. Independent investigators began pressuring Graceland for access to records. News crews camped outside the estate, hoping to catch any sign of what was happening inside. Within weeks, the speculation had reached a fever pitch. A faction of Elvis's most devoted followers claimed that the discoveries proved what they had always believed, that Elvis had faked his death in 1977 and lived in secrecy, only to have traces of his true story hidden away in his grave. Others insisted that the evidence had been planted by someone within the estate, a publicity stunt designed to reignite global interest in Elvis's legacy. A third group believed something even stranger, that whatever had been found inside the tomb pointed to something beyond rational explanation. As the frenzy escalated, a decision had to be made. The Presley estate could continue to deny everything, hoping the rumors would eventually die down, or they could confront the situation head-on. The problem was that no amount of official statements would ever satisfy those who were convinced that the truth was being hidden. One thing was certain. The discovery had changed everything. No matter what version of events the Presley estate chose to endorse, no matter how much evidence was buried or revealed, the legend of Elvis Presley had entered a new era. His story had never truly ended, and now it never would. If you enjoyed this video, make sure to subscribe so you don't miss what's coming next. Check out more videos on the channel for more fascinating stories. And if you found this interesting, share it with others who might too.